The views expressed are those of the guests and not necessarily those of the producer. Today's topic.
What makes us good or bad in Passion for Truth, award-winning program?
Welcome to another edition of Passion for Truth. Science is discovering what makes us good or bad. It tells us that morality and kindness are written deep in our genes, and so are savagery and bloodlust. But somebody still has to boot up that software and configure it properly. Who is that somebody and how does she or he do it? All with our next with our panelist, Hali Jalani, Chair of the Asian Task Force of the United Nations Association, National Capital Area. Fred Peterson, Defense and Counterterrorism Advisor. As Congressional Fellow, Fred is also Senior Fellow at the U.S. Freedom Foundation. Sherry Gossip, Managing Editor of the New Individualist magazine. Dr. Amarjeet Singh, Voices for Freedom, also columnist for several newspapers. Dr. Sandra Bunn Livingstone, Executive Director, Christian Solidarity Worldwide Headquarters in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Edward Hudgens, Executive Director of the Atlas Society Center for Objectivism. Dr. Hudgens also is an editor of the Regulation magazine at Cato Institute. Welcome you all.
Thank you.
Starting with you, Ed, we all innately feel, what's right and wrong, and we are all equipped with those genes, but we don't necessarily follow our instincts. How do you read that?
Well, the situation is this. We evolved, human beings evolved over many hundreds of thousands and millions of years with various capacities. These are including a desire for food, a desire for sex, a desire for the company of others, all of these kinds of things. But we reached a certain point of self-consciousness that separates us from all the other animals, where we are conscious of the fact that we're thinking, we're conscious of the fact that we're hungry, and we can control what we do about our impulses, whether we eat or not eat and so forth. So ultimately, the first level of control is in ourselves. That is what it is to be conscious and to be human.
Something goes wrong with the booting of that software, Sandra?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with the analysis of the Time article, because I don't think that a posteriori examining brain waves and brain chemistry tells us what a priori motivated an individual to decide something or not. So I think there's a personal free will involved that every human being has. This might be influenced by environment and what you're taught in your culture and so on, but ultimately it's up to us to decide how we act.
It's the community that boots up that behavior, Dr. Singh?
I think, again, the Time magazine article is not doing justice with the subject, as psychology itself and even science of genetics itself is quite in an early stages of experimenting, and to come to conclusions based on some studies here and there is not the right thing to do. Certainly, I think community behavior, or as in the spiritual terminology in Sikhism we call as Sangat, when the congregation or Sangat, certainly that reinforces the righteous thinking, or whatever in society we consider as the right things. So certainly community, Sangat, good company reinforces the right instincts. Yeah.
Do you agree that, Sherry, we have a tendency to help those close to home and ignore those far away?
I think there's a tendency, but I disagree that that's some type of sign of brutal savagery lurking in our genes. I think it's basically common sense. You're naturally going to be more concerned to help your lover or your spouse or your children. Those are also people that, because of their proximity, you're probably more equipped to help. So I disagree with that, but I do acknowledge, Paul, that it's very true that totalitarian systems do try to exacerbate that fear of the other, and tribalism also sort of inflicts this desire upon its members to be able to ignore the other.
Is this the tribalism that inflicts the desire to commit acts of savagery, Fred?
Each human being, as each element of creation, has within it a definition. And that definition of the human being includes such things as hunger, which are survival enhancing, so we will seek food. Sex, so that we will seek to procreate one another. the purpose of each of these definitions, ultimately, when we decide why it is there or where it came from, is outside the realm of science. Then we begin to develop a much broader question in a science of, it becomes a matter of theology, it becomes a matter of cosmology, it becomes a matter outside of science. But I think it's indisputable that a human being, as a stone, has a purpose, and that purpose seeks fulfillment and expansion. And I think that when we go beyond those scientific definitions and we go into the reasons why, we enter an entirely new realm that is not measurable by science, but that is measurable by the human capacity for understanding those parts of the human nature which exist beyond science.
Holy clubs, social groups, fraternities, do you think they all keep us on the right track by giving us the appropriate punishment, by expelling the undesirable members? How do you read that?
When it comes to groups, I have very mixed feelings. I've always said greatness actually lies in individuals. It's groups, organizations, and, fraternities, etc., that I actually have a problem with. And so you're actually asking the wrong person if you want me to reinforce groupthink. And part of the problem that I have with groups is, whenever we talk about certain totalitarian societies where we say, the populations there are like a herd of sheep, that's exactly the problem I have there. The individual thought, individual thinking, individual principles have been suppressed for what is supposedly, the good of the whole, but I very often see that it's not necessarily the good of the whole, so I have a problem with that.
And yet the beauty and the dynamic tension between the two makes human beings what they are and gives value to our actions. If we can, in other words, overcome natural inclinations in order to supersede or rise above them to other more altruistic ends, the flip side of that is not even rising to those and abusing that realm that exists in the margins of the spirit, both positive and negative. But it is what gives us greatness, and it is what is our greatest failing.
But I want to follow up just what Holly said about the individual. I think and Fred too, I think what you have to ask is, we all agree, I think, that we have self-control, we have free will, we have all these capacities, but then we have to ask, what are we going to do about them? How are we going to indulge our habits or our desire for food, for all of these other kinds of things? By what standard? I would say the standard has to be the good of each and every one of us as individuals, the fulfillment of all of these subtle capacities for joy in friendship, for joy in aesthetic experiences, for the joy of creation that we can do through our own efforts. And if that is the standard, that is individual survival and self-fulfillment, then when you ask about a group, if I choose to associate with you as a group because you help fulfill those things, maybe we form a, let's see, is it a quintet? No, this would be a sextet in music. Well, I want all of you to be in my sextet because we can make beautiful music together. I'm getting something out of it, you're getting something out of it. It's a win-win situation, but it has to start with the individual and the fact that our control ultimately is here.
Okay. I was going to say, it's not so much, I think, individual versus groups, and groups are bad, but it's the type of group, because now we have this phenomenon from the prehistoric ages of tribalism, and it's not just in Eastern Europe, in pockets of Eastern Europe or pockets of the Middle East, it's also here in the United States in the 21st century, which is your identity and your value is strictly from the group that you're a member of, and your value is ascription, not achievement. In other words, if you popped out of the womb as a gay person, your value in your culture is the gay culture. If you're deaf, you value deaf culture. There are even deaf people who have fought against implants to get hearing back. Right. Your value as an individual is just